Let's recap here. So you're making a program and you're using variables in your program. So the first thing you say is, okay, I need a variable. And what's its purpose gonna be? Well, I need a variable to hold the price of something. So you probably give your variable a name, something simple, lowercase letters, the price. And then you ask yourself, okay, what kind of variable is this gonna be? Is this variable gonna hold a bunch of letters and words? Is this variable gonna hold a number? And if it is gonna hold a number, is it gonna be just a whole number without any decimals, or is it gonna be a number with decimals? So you have three things going on in your mind when you make a variable. So if I'm making a variable for the price of something, I say, well, prices do have decimals. You know, something can be $10.25, so it could be 10.25, 10.25. So if I've got decimals going on here, I'm going to use a double variable. So my variable name, the type that it is, and we can leave it just like that if we want. And this is called declaring a variable. It's called declaring because you've declared that you're going to use a variable called price, but you haven't, it doesn't equal anything right now. It's just waiting for a value. All right. So to add to that array of questions that you have to ask yourself when you're using a variable, here's another question you can now ask yourself. Okay, I know I'm creating a variable to hold a value. Is this value going to change ever in my program? Yes or no? And that's what a constant is. If you're making a variable for a value that is never going to change in your program, you can make it a constant. And what that does is it makes this variable constant. It means you cannot change it at any point, anywhere in your program. And it's a very minute detail in programming, but we're trying to preach proper programming. We're trying to preach, doing the right things because you're just isolated in your little bubble. You make a program for yourself and you just don't care about anyone else. And that's cool right now, but you know what? In the world of programming, that's not cool. You got to be considerate. People got to know what's up. People got to know what you're doing. So if you have a variable that is never going to change, all you have to do is use the const keyword. And then you have to make your variable. So for example, if the price of something was never going to change, I could put constant in front of this variable. Now, of course, I'm getting a red line because if you're making a constant, well, you have to give your variable a value because you can't change it later. So if you're creating a variable that is a constant, it has to have a value to begin with. And one other little piece of information. The name of your variable, instead of going all lowercase, you're going all uppercase. So this is the proper way to create a constant variable in your program. I'm going to Control Z. I'm going to undo that because I didn't want my price to be constant, but just the way the words were flowing out of my mouth, I felt that I had to do that. And now I don't want to do that. So I'll make a new variable. For example, in your next assignment, you're going to have to deal with a GST rate. Whoops. GST. So I'm creating a variable that's going to hold the GST rate, the goods and sales tax rate of Manitoba, because we're working with money. GST, the rate is a percent, so it's going to have a decimal, so I'm going to call it a double. And the GST in Manitoba is 0.05, which is 5% for all you math nerds out there. Is the GST rate ever going to change in my program? No. So I'm going to make it a constant. And if I make a variable a constant, I have to capitalize all of the, I don't have to, but you kind of have to capitalize your variable name just like that. Now I know what you're saying. Well, what if you have this long, complicated variable name? Like, how do we like if I said if I wanted to make a more specific name, like GST, of Manitoba, GST Manitoba, like that's not really nice to look at. So you can just use underscores. So you could go Manitoba underscore GST. If you wanted to make your variable name have some more words, stuff like that. I'm just trying to show you everything possible with a constant. So there you go. You have two variables. One's a constant, one is not. So just giving you a little help for your next assignment. Let's say the price of something is, what did I say, $10.50? And before I get too carried away, constants should always be the very first variables in your program. So they should be at the very top of your program when you make them. So let's bring in another variable. Let's say I had a double for the GST charge. So how much GST am I going to get charged? How much tax am I going to get charged on something that costs $10.50? Well, Visual Studio is not going to like this where I'm doing this because I can't do this math in this part of my form. I have to be in one of these events, but whatever, just ignore it. So hopefully you could say that the GST charge would be equal to the Manitoba GST, so the 0.05 times your price. So this variable, you could say, would be equal to this times this. And Visual Studio doesn't like this because this is something you'd put later on in your program. So for example, here's your program. Let's throw a button on there. Then you use this button to calculate the price or the GST charge. So when I clicked it, now I can put it here. So if that makes it easier for you. So this variable is going to tell me how much I'm being charged in GST and in tax, because it's taking the price and it's taking the GST rate, which is 5%. So I could have another variable called total. And this is exactly how much I'm going to be charged for something that is $10.50 with a 5% tax. What would total be equal to? Well, you could say total would be equal to the price of the item plus how much I'm being charged in tax. So once I've figured out how much I'm getting dinged for tax, I could say, well, now I can give you a total final price. It's going to be the list price of the item, the $10.50, and how much you're being charged. So that's a little segue into the next assignment there. But as for constants, I think we covered everything there. Yeah, constants are nice. And you know what? Why do we need constant? Why do we need to label something that's never going to change? Well, once again, readability for other programmers who's working in a program, but also behind the scenes, stuff that we take for granted. Variables in nature, by their name, they vary. Variables are created because you're always changing the values of those variables. So behind the scenes in your computer, when you create a variable, a normal variable, listen, stuff that's way over my head and stuff that's way over your head, but these variables, like, they exist in your computer somewhere. And when we create a constant variable, we're taking a load off the computer. We're saying, don't worry, this variable is never going to change. You don't have to get things set up behind the scenes to make this variable flexible. High-end level stuff, but these are the reasons why we make constants. Okay, cool.